Welcome to Lecture 4. In this lecture, we're going to talk briefly about how to determine the function of behavior. Many individuals with autism do have some behavior problems, and it's important when you're intervening on those problems to understand the function of the behavior so that you can provide effective behavior interventions. The first thing that you want to do when you're trying to determine the function of behavior is to operationally define behavior. That is, you must define behavior in a way that is observable, measurable, and very specific. You should be defining this behavior in such a way that anybody observing the student would be able to use that definition to determine whether the behavior is occurring or, in fact, is not occurring. So we don't want to say that Johnny is aggressive. We want to say that Johnny hits his classmates in the arm or the back with such force that it can cause a small bruise or redness. Very different, because what I may see as aggressive may not be the same thing that somebody else considers to be aggressive. But if you define it in a very specific way, then everybody knows that they're looking at the same thing. And it's very easy for individuals to say, yes, that is the problem behavior, or no, that's not the problem behavior. So you want to make sure that it's very observable and very specific. The next thing that you're going to do once you've defined that behavior very clearly, is you need to observe what happens, what causes the behavior to occur. So we talk about what we call the ABCs of behavior management: the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. And the antecedent is what happens immediately before the behavior. It's often what causes the behavior to occur. It's also important, though, when looking at the antecedent, to consider things that are called setting events. And setting events are things that might happen before that specific antecedent that make the behavior more likely to occur, or the antecedent more likely to trigger the behavior. So a setting event might be something like the student is hungry, or they didn't get enough sleep last night, or they didn't take their medication, or they had a fight with a classmate. So it's something that happens before the actual trigger that makes it more likely for that behavior to be triggered. So it's important to understand setting events so that you can control for those as well when you are um, teaching functionally equivalent behavior. The behavior is that problem behavior that is exhibited that we have carefully defined prior to. And then the consequence is what happens immediately after the behavior that actually reinforces its reoccurrence. You want to make sure that when you're doing these ABC charts, and when you're looking at what happens before the behavior and the consequence, when you're describing the consequence, you want to describe what actually happens all around that student. This isn't the time when you're actually trying to make a hypothesis about the behavior. After you look at objectively what actually happens, that's when you'll make the hypotheses. So you don't want to say Johnny hit someone and he escaped the activity. You want to say Johnny hit someone and the teacher told him he wasn't allowed to do that and sent him to timeout. So be very careful to describe exactly what happens instead of trying to determine what you think the function of the behavior is, because you want to look at multiple occurrences of the behavior so that you can begin to see the patterns about what is the function of the behavior. Once you have that ABC analysis and you've looked at multiple occurrences of the behavior, then you want to use that analysis to determine the function of the behavior. What is that behavior doing for the individual? And usually, behavior is either to get something or to avoid something. So they may be trying to get attention, they may be trying to get an object or an activity or food, they may be trying to get some self-stimulatory feeling, some sensory input. They also might be trying to avoid something. They might be trying to avoid an activity or avoid an event. They might be trying to avoid a person. They might be trying to avoid sensory overload or overstimulation. The noise is too loud and they're trying to avoid that. So it's really important to look and determine what the purpose of the behavior serves, because the function is actually a need of the individual. And it's important that we enable the student to meet that need, to meet that function. It's not the function that it's a problem, it's the behavior that they're using to get that need met that is the problem. So we want to teach them a way to get that real need met in a way that doesn't cause a problem for themselves, for their classmates, for their teachers, for anybody else. So, in order to do that, you want to replace the problem behavior with functionally equivalent behavior or communication. To do that, first of all, you need to provide direct instruction on replacement behavior. You need to make sure they know how to do what they are to do in order to get that need met. Then you want to positively reinforce all occurrence of that equivalent behavior at a high rate. So every time that they engage in that replacement behavior, you want to make sure that you are reinforcing them at a high rate, usually with giving them whatever it is that that behavior wants them to do. So if they're trying to escape a task and they ask, I need a break, you want to give them that break immediately. Um, I know sometimes people think, but I want them to do work. Well, they're not doing work anyways. So let's teach them an appropriate way to ask to take a break. And once they've learned that skill and that skill is really solid, then you can start working on teaching them to wait longer for that reinforcement. So you start out reinforcing at a very high rate. And then once the behavior is well established, that's when you can start to reinforce less often. That's when you can ask them to wait a minute before they escape the behavior. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that that problem behavior is inefficient and ineffective. Usually, individuals are engaging in that problem behavior because they've learned that it's a very efficient and effective way to get what they need. So, you want to make it so that they have a better way to get what they need. And you want to make, at the same time, that problem behavior inefficient and ineffective. If it's possible to ignore that problem behavior, you can. Not all problem behavior, particularly high rates of aggression, is possible to ignore. Also, whenever you ignore a behavior, you're going to get what's called an extinction burst. So you're going to see that problem behavior, you may see it increase to a very high rate. So if it's something you know that you can't tolerate for it to go to a high rate, you may want to think about doing something else other than ignoring the behavior. So you may want to put them through a prompt system of using the functionally equivalent behavior. You can use other strategies like positive practice or overcorrection as ways to make the problem behavior inefficient and ineffective.